also a thing specifically about genre shows is that, thank you, is that we often feel when we're in the middle of some tragedy or some trauma, like it's much bigger than people are seeing. So you're like, well, I feel pain, but the word pain doesn't really encompass exactly what I'm feeling. So in a genre show, it can be big and operatic. And so sometimes seeing someone deal with something tragic and then put on a cape and go out and fight, or do things like Buffy would do, or do something dramatic like you'd see on Game of Thrones, it's an expression of exactly how deep you feel it and exactly how strongly you feel it that you can't really express to people who haven't been through it.
Well, genre shows can, as paradoxical as this might seem to some people, they can let us look more closely at real life than a lot of other fiction does. And I was using this phrase, this filter of fiction. For example, I teach forensic psychology. And when I'm talking about things such as someone, having family members get killed, that's a very difficult topic for a lot of people listening. And some of the topics get so unpleasant, they kind of turn, the emotional reaction keeps them from really thinking about the things I'm saying. But when I teach a class in which the whole class is about Batman and his enemies, and I do about once every 3 years, I teach a class called Batman. They can go, oh, that's so cool, as they're still talking about what we know about real people, real victims, and the experiences they've had, but through that filter of the fictional character. Star Trek is the example I use so much of the thing that 50 years ago was letting people look at human interactions, emotion versus logic, and society, and so many things, the racial difficulties, where other TV shows weren't exploring those in that in-depth way. But because it's those aliens, we can see the hypocrisy of these two guys. Well, I'm white on the right side, I'm white on the left side.
And let's face facts, the world can be a really lonely place. And we're not taught generally how to process our emotions, right? And I think that's one reason that addiction and pain is so pervasive. We just don't know how to face things that hurt, so we want to put ourselves to sleep in some way, in one way or another. And I think that I also went through a really traumatic experience years ago and made some really bad choices and drank and have really realized how important it is to connect with people when you're in that kind of pain. And I think that's what genre television and film does. When we come into your living room, we're in your home, you're there with your family in your pajamas, and we get to be the ones to teach you how to reflect, or lead you. Teach is a bad word, but lead you in reflecting and laughing and crying and making that phone call and making the choices that you make. And that's an incredibly intimate thing. And I think in film, it's the same thing when you're in an audience in the dark, all facing one direction, and you hear a message that you've been needing to hear, or something reminds you of the way that life should be. That's incredibly intimate and powerful. And you bond with other people who get that. When I see somebody in a Trek uniform, I go, we get the same things. We get infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And I think there's just so much incredible power in that, both in the stories and in how they relate to our real lives.
Maurice, you reminded me actually when you speak of Batman as someone who's always got a piece of him that's broken, and we talked about that actually. There's a high school class that now, because at my high school they started teaching Batman in one of the English classes because of conversations I had with the teacher about that kind of aspect of him. And it reminds me also of how sometimes as fans we know when the story goes wrong, when some core goes out of place. And for one thing with Batman, that example, Joel Schumacher, when he did Batman Forever and then Batman and Robin, which was really the bad one. I remember in an interview, he said, well, we're trying a different approach, and I just figured, eventually he's got to get over it, right? And I just thought, no, that's not the story.
You never get over it.
Hamlet, and whether you're talking about it's a story of look, Hamlet doesn't chill out, or whether you're talking about the human experience of what remotely could you be talking about, that's part of the ownership of fandom, that we're okay with cast changes here and there, we're okay with evolution happening, with Spock growing to accept more of his human side, but there are cores where if it changes, we get really upset.
Right.
We know how the Doctor acts. We'll accept regeneration. We don't, if he acts way out of character, we're like, no, that doesn't work for us. And I find that very interesting with fandom. And, there's all of these things have such a beautiful metaphor that we can all relate to. They're just taken to a fantastic level. I mean, the Supernatural episodes and the Doctor Who episodes, whatever, I think that most resonate with all of us is when it can be broken down to, this is about meeting your father for the first time. Or this is about realizing your brother's a human being. Or just those basic things. Just across the panel, is there any kind of, just off the top of your head, it doesn't have to be your favorite or even the most momentous, but some episode or some moment where you're like, oh man, and where you were connecting to it, or you just thought, like, this is what I needed to hear right now.
And this is not because I had gone through anything specific, but because I had watched a friend go through it. The Body episode of Buffy. Yeah, that one. That's still, like, even thinking about it every time it's on anywhere, every time anyone even mentions it. There's just this starkness about it. There's no music, and it's sort of a shock. I mean, we see very dramatic things in that show, but that particular one just stopped me dead in my tracks, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it and what it was like, not just for someone who's lost somebody to go through this, but to be a friend to somebody who's gone through this. So that one was a big one for me.
I give a different answer almost every time we talk about this. The one I mentioned before, I had watched an old rerun of the Andy Griffith Show, of all things, in which the kid's father didn't believe him, and didn't believe him, and in the end, it's like, I don't know why the kid's going on with this, but then he found out the truth of what was going on. And the dad was, okay, Opie, you and Aunt B are going to have this, and I'm going to eat crow. And I didn't really know that phrase, but it was the dad acknowledging that he can make a mistake, that he can own up and recognize and respect the kid. And that was very meaningful to me. I don't really think my dad wants me to say why.
I can't remember the episode title, but it was the Smallville episode. It was a Christmas episode, and it was very much a Ghost of Christmas Past kind of thing, where Lex's mother appears to him and shows him that he's at a crossroads, and that if he goes towards the good, he'll have a very simple life with Lana and kids and a future, and we see Clark ends up marrying Alison Brie's character. Chloe, thank you. I'm getting old. And so at the very end of the episode, he makes the choice to embrace. He wants to seek, as he calls it in an early episode, he doesn't want to do good, he wants to do great. He wants to do greatness. And he turns his back on all that. That one sticks with me. Because I think that there are many times in our lives where we're at that crossroads, and we never know when it is the crossroads, but there's a jumping off place several times in our lives, and whether we go left or right makes all the difference in the world. And so that one sticks. That's a heavy one for me. I think because of I made a choice to stop drinking.
Right.
On January 20th, 1989, I stopped destroying myself.
Yeah.
And it was almost as though I could hear my father saying, "It's over. You don't have to do this to yourself anymore." So. Sorry, Dr. Scarlet, go ahead.
I was working with a patient who had experienced sexual assault, and after 6 months, her parents still didn't understand why she was still experiencing symptoms. They thought she should just be over it by now. And I had attempted to explain to the parents that there's no end point, no timeline on healing, that different people heal at different rates. And my patient was a big Buffy fan, and Do you guys remember, for those of you that watched Buffy, in the beginning of season 6, some spoilers, okay, so at the end...
She's been through bad stuff.
She's been through bad stuff, and after she comes back, she's not quite the same. And she's confiding in her friend Spike, who's actually a vampire. She doesn't feel like she can talk to anyone else. And she tells him, everything hurts. Like, everything I touch hurts, and every moment hurts. And it's nonstop from this moment to the next. And my patient described that episode, and we watched it together, and she didn't quite have the words to talk about her experience of having been raped, but she pointed to the screen right when that happened. She started crying, and she said, that is how I feel. And we talked about her feelings, and that was the first time she was able to have a better understanding of how badly she was violated. And that evening she was able to show the episode to her parents, who for the first time had a better understanding of just how much their daughter was suffering each and every day. And I know that episode affected her, but it also affected me in working with her.